You're welcome to another interesting episode on the Let's Talk Education podcast. In the previous episode, we looked at cultivating the habit of reading at home. Among the points discussed were creating a book-rich environment, building routines, and using motivation, among others. You can check out the full episode, which is episode 2, for more on this. In this episode, we move from the home and zoom in on the school, discussing how to cultivate the habit of reading at school. Before we go on, let's take the education quote for this episode. And now, the education quote for this episode. Students will read if we give them the books, the time, and the enthusiastic encouragement to do so. Students will read if we give them the books, the time, and the enthusiastic encouragement to do so. This quote is by Donald Miller. What I like about this quote is how the author asserts the intentionality with which we approach student reading. So let's go to the main points for this episode right after this break. This is Let's Talk Education. You're welcome to episode 3, season 1 of the Let's Talk Education podcast. We are discussing cultivating a habit of reading in school. How can schools support pupils to build a reading culture? Whenever we speak of reading in school, many people think of this as the responsibility of the English teacher. But it's helpful to recognize that as long as we are teaching using the English language as a means of instruction, literacy development needs conscious input from all teachers, irrespective of what subjects they teach. And so when we think about building a reading culture in school, the first thing to think about is how the school as a whole can make reading part of its culture. Can the school dedicate the first week of school, for example, to reading across subjects? It's library or reading time on the school's calendar or timetable, and is this observed? Are there enough reading books for pupils? Do teachers encourage pupils to read through their words and actions? Are there specific whole school programs aimed at cultivating reading as a habit? These are not simply questions that need a yes or no response. They are meant to spark some brainstorming for solutions, and based on whether you are a director, a school improvement support officer, or head teacher or teacher, you can contribute to making your school a place that builds student interest in reading. As a teacher, you are equally a role model to students. So make time briefly to talk about the book that you are reading and what you find interesting about it. This has a subtle way of telling people that reading is an interesting activity. I remember getting into the habit of telling my pupils what I read during the weekends, and on Mondays I'll come to class hearing from them on what they've read while I also tell them what I read. There were weekends that I could not make time to read, but they'll still ask me, and I had no response for them. But that alone was a reason to encourage me to read, because I know that, hey, on Monday I'm going to discuss something I've read with my pupils, and that alone made a great difference for my reading. It also got some of my pupils reading quite often, including a 15-year-old who finished a book of over 600 pages over the weekend. The point here is that sometimes people pick up what we do rather than what we say. So cultivating a habit of reading sometimes starts from us as educators. One major barrier to cultivating a reading habit is the unavailability of level-appropriate books, or sometimes no books at all. This is more common in some public rural schools, and in a setting like this, the unavailability of books remain a barrier to reading until someone shows leadership. Obviously, we cannot ask people to read if there are no materials to read, so you may consider starting a book drive and reaching out to organizations that donate books. I know this is not easy, but there are people and organizations out there willing to support if you put in consistent effort. When I started a book drive for the first time in 2017, it took close to a month before I got a positive response, but I did anyway. And I must commend several Lead for Ghana, Teach for Nigeria, and other dynamic individuals in the Teach for All network who would seize every opportunity to front some initiatives, including numerous book drives that I have seen being led across the last few years. Also note that beyond physical books, you can get old newspapers and magazines from shops to bring to class to read. Some reading applications or PDF books may also be great. And in some cases, you can use widely available literature like the Bible, the Quran, or other religious books if your school is not a secular school. If you are listening and want to start a book drive, try to make some sacrifices yourself and discuss with other teachers as well as parents and past students you're in contact with who may either donate support or offer some advice. You can also consider some bookshops that may be willing to give off some old books. It may also be possible to borrow books from nearby schools or libraries, or take up the challenge of working with your pupils to write few stories and seek support to publish them or print them. We'll continue after this short break. This is Let's Talk Education. You're welcome from that short break. We're still discussing cultivating a habit of reading in school. This is Let's Talk Education. If your school and pupils already have some books to start with, building a habit of reading becomes easier. If we want pupils to do something, they need to know why it matters. Start building interest in reading by making pupils appreciate the benefit or importance of reading. Personal examples and stories are always great. You can talk about why people need to read one point at a time during assemblies. You can put up posters on the notice board or inside class, or even dedicate a full lesson aimed at having pupils understand the need to read. This is a great starting point because we always tell pupils to do things, but do not invest as much time and effort into making them understand why it is in their own interest to do so. So let's start this by making people really grasp and understand why reading is for them or is for their benefit, and they'll be more likely to take this up. We're still talking about creating the habit of reading at school. If you can create space in your classroom, you can create a reading corner with a box of books and a mat to give people the opportunity to switch to a reading zone where they can go through some pages in silence. The idea of a designated reading corner helps people to take a psychological journey to a place of reading. You may add some decorations, paintings, small bookshelves, or pillows to make this space more convenient and comfortable. You can also apply the law of scarcity to increase the desire for using this space by limiting its availability to specific times during the day or to specific days. For anyone who can influence the school timetable, a reading break is a great way to cultivate the habit of reading among pupils. This is not a replacement of the usual break time. Of course, people do need their break time. A reading break is that time where people have no specific subject and can reach to read anything they wish for during a particular period of time and come back to briefly discuss what they have read with one another. If reading breaks are ambitious, consider reserving a little time in your lessons to allow people to read some materials relating to the lesson. Sometimes you may realize that the school timetable is not enough, and this is where after school or weekend programs may be helpful. A reading club, for example, that meets weekly or bi-weekly to read and discuss books is worth exploring. Children enjoy social participation, so you are more likely to succeed at developing an interest in reading among club members than you will engaging people individually. Club members can set reading goals, keep records of book titles they've read and their major learnings. You can also have pupils bring books from their homes and swap them with one another to read, which is a helpful technique in areas where there are limited books and would allow the same books to rotate among several people and have them read it. You are listening to episode 3 of the Let's Talk Education podcast. We'll be right back after this break. We're still looking at ideas for building the culture or the habit of reading at school. To take a whole school approach, you can weave reading events into school life. You may institute a reading week where staff and people spend time reading and discussing books that they choose. This same week can be dedicated to encouraging reading, inviting a book author, inviting local leaders like the assembly or council member to read aloud to pupils, creating some artwork from a book, posting a collection of favorite quotes from books, holding a talk on reading, among others. Well, you may not have a whole week for this in your contest, in which case just a day or two in each term can be dedicated to some of these activities with varying names as you please. You can call it a reading festival, reading days, among others. The last point to consider is how you can use positive reinforcement to influence or encourage desired behavior. So be generous with praise for pupils who make time to read, drawing the attention of other people to what is valued or desired. You may choose to recognize people who are reading on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis. This can be an encouraging handwritten letter, a certificate of recognition signed by the head teacher or you, or some educational supplies, including some interesting books. You can also talk to the pupil's guardian on phone, email, or in person, praising their efforts and encouraging them to support their words to continue to read. These simple gestures can have a long-term effect on people's reading habit. Thank you for listening. This is where time would allow us to bring this episode to a close. Please subscribe to receive subsequent episodes of the Let's Talk Education podcast. Your feedback is important to us, so please send your questions, suggestions, and any inquiries on this podcast to stephenmcbarrister@gmail.com. That is StephenMcBarister@gmail.com. You can also email your WhatsApp number to be added to a broadcast list so that you receive subsequent episodes on your WhatsApp directly. So you join us again for the next episode. My name is Stephen Tettegah, your host, and this is Let's Talk Education.